Babysitting seems like one of the safest jobs in the world. Watch the kids, feed them, put them to bed. Simple. Until someone starts looking through the front window. An unlocked door lets the wrong person inside. Or the person you've trusted for years becomes the center of a nightmare you'll never fully understand. These are 3 babysitting horror stories that prove danger doesn't always come from the dark. Sometimes it's already inside the house. This happened when I was 15 years old, and to this day, it's still the most terrifying experience of my life. I'd been babysitting since I was 11, mostly for family. By the time this happened, taking care of my nephews had become routine. My older sister worked early morning shifts, so every now and then she'd ask me to spend the night at her house. That way I could watch the kids while she left for work before sunrise. Back then I didn't even have my own phone. If I stayed overnight, my mom would let me borrow hers in case of an emergency. The 2 boys I was watching were around 8 and 4 years old. We'll call them D and M. My sister's neighborhood wasn't exactly safe. Right next to her house was a large apartment complex that had a reputation for attracting trouble. Police cars weren't uncommon, neither were fights. Still, during the day the kids loved playing at the playground and basketball court nearby, so we spent plenty of afternoons there. That morning started completely normal. I woke up early and decided to surprise the boys with French toast. The house was quiet. Both of them were still asleep. I put my earbuds in and started cooking while listening to music. Every now and then, I thought I heard someone calling. I'd pull one earbud out, listen, nothing. Then I'd put it back in, only to hear another strange noise a minute later. I repeated that probably 10 or 12 times. Eventually I convinced myself it was just my imagination mixing with the music. By the time breakfast was finished, the boys wandered into the kitchen, still sleepy, still rubbing their eyes. I sat the youngest in his booster seat, started cutting up pieces of French toast for him, while D sat across the table eating quietly. We turned on the radio and played children's music while everyone finished breakfast. Even then, I kept feeling like I heard something outside, but I ignored it. After breakfast, I cleaned the dishes and started getting everyone dressed. The boys begged me to take them to the playground. I finally gave in, told them we'd go as soon as I changed clothes. I had barely stepped into the bedroom when I heard it. Crack, loud enough to shake the house. I jumped immediately, ran back into the hallway. D was already standing there, holding his little brother. His face had gone completely white. I asked if he'd broken something. He shook his head without saying a word. I've never forgotten the look on his face, pure fear. I told both boys to stay in the hallway, away from the windows. Then I slowly walked through the house, trying to figure out what had happened. Nothing looked out of place. No broken dishes, no fallen furniture. Then, as I glanced toward the front door, I saw movement. The door had an oval-shaped glass window in the center. You couldn't really see inside unless you pressed your face right against it, and that's exactly what someone was doing. A man. His hands were cupped around the glass, trying to look inside. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could see he was dressed completely in black. Black jacket, black gloves. Thankfully, I was standing off to the side. He couldn't see me. He stood there for what felt like forever, looking around inside the house. Then suddenly, he disappeared. I didn't wait to see where he went. I sprinted back down the hallway, grabbed both boys, and shoved them into the bathroom. I whispered, "Lock the door behind you and don't come out." D looked terrified, confused, but thankfully, he listened. The problem was, my mom's phone was still sitting on the kitchen counter, which meant I had to leave the boys and walk back toward the front of the house. I forced myself to move. Every step felt heavier than the last. The second I reached the kitchen, another loud cracking sound echoed through the house. Glass. Someone was breaking glass. I completely lost it. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. Instead of calling 911 first, I called my sister. To this day I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted an adult. Maybe because I panicked. The second she answered, I started crying. I told her someone was trying to break into the house. She immediately yelled for me to call the police. I didn't want to hang up. I was terrified, but eventually I did, and dialed emergency services. While I was on the phone, I looked out the kitchen window. Another man sprinted across the backyard. There wasn't just one person outside, there were 2. At that point I honestly believed we were going to die. I remember crying so hard I could barely tell the dispatcher my address. Every second waiting for the police felt like 10 minutes. I kept expecting to hear the front door splinter open, or footsteps running through the house. Finally, sirens. A patrol car pulled into the neighborhood. The dispatcher told me officers had arrived. I carefully unlocked the bathroom door. The boys were still inside crying. When the officers searched outside, they immediately found the damage. One window had been shattered. Another had large cracks spreading across the glass. Someone had absolutely been trying to force their way inside. The only thing that stopped them was a heavy wooden bed frame positioned against the windows from the inside. The officers believed the intruders gave up once they realized they couldn't get through quickly, especially after hearing me on the phone. They searched the neighborhood for hours. Nobody was ever arrested. No suspects, no explanation, just two men who vanished into the neighborhood. I've replayed that morning in my head thousands of times. If I had already taken the boys outside, we would have been alone at the playground. If I'd left the doors unlocked, they would have walked right in. If that bed frame hadn't been blocking the window, they probably would have made it inside before the police arrived. I honestly believe that piece of furniture saved our lives. Even now, years later, whenever I hear unexpected glass breaking, my heart immediately races, because for one terrifying morning, at 15 years old, I was the only thing standing between two frightened little boys and whoever was trying to get into that house. Out of every strange situation I've ever experienced, this is still the one that unsettles me the most, because if one small thing had gone differently, I honestly don't know what would have happened. I was about 15 or 16 years old. Back then, I babysat regularly for a family that lived in a large apartment complex. They had two young kids. Both loved riding their bikes around the parking lot while I watched them from nearby. It was a quiet neighborhood during the day, and I had babysat there enough times that I felt comfortable. One afternoon, while the kids were riding around, one of the neighbors walked over to me. He looked to be in his 40s. At first, he seemed friendly enough, just making casual conversation. He asked where I went to school, what grade I was in, whether I played sports. Then the conversation took a strange turn. He asked if I was a runner. Confused, I told him no. He smiled and said, "You have amazing legs." Even at that age, I knew the comment was inappropriate, but unfortunately, I'd heard comments like that from older men before. As sad as it sounds, I had become used to ignoring them. I gave an awkward smile and tried ending the conversation. The kids were getting restless anyway, so I told them it was time for lunch and headed back inside the apartment. Looking back now, I made one huge mistake. I forgot to lock the door. It wasn't intentional. I was focused on getting two little kids washed up and seated at the table. Within a few minutes, everyone was eating lunch. The apartment was quiet. Then I heard the front door open. I looked up, and there he was, the neighbor, standing inside the apartment. He calmly stepped through the doorway, closed the door behind him, and locked it. That was the moment everything changed. Up until then, I had convinced myself he was just socially awkward, maybe lonely, maybe strange, but nobody walks into someone else's apartment uninvited, especially when only a teenage babysitter and two small children are home. I remember my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The kids didn't understand what was happening. They just kept eating. Meanwhile, this man stood there smiling. He told me he wanted to get to know me better. I don't remember exactly what I said after that, but nobody walks into someone else's apartment uninvited, especially when only a teenage babysitter and two small children are home. I remember my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. The kids didn't understand what was happening. They just kept eating. Meanwhile, this man stood there smiling. He told me he wanted to get to know me better. I don't remember exactly what I said after that. I slammed the door shut and locked every lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. The rest of the afternoon, I couldn't relax. Every sound outside made me jump. Every passing footstep made me think he had come back. When the parents finally got home, I didn't say anything. Part of me blamed myself. If I had locked the door, none of it would have happened. I felt embarrassed, like I'd made a stupid mistake. But after I got home, I told my mom what had happened. The expression on her face changed instantly. She immediately called the family I babysat for and insisted they report the incident. Not long afterward, the police became involved. And that's when we learned something that made my stomach drop. The neighbor wasn't just some socially awkward man. Authorities had already been looking for him in connection with a very serious violent criminal investigation. Hearing that made me replay the entire afternoon in my head. The conversation outside, the compliments, the unlocked door, the way he walked in like he belonged there. And suddenly, every single moment felt much darker than it had at the time. I still think about how easily that situation could have ended differently. If the children hadn't been there, if I had reacted differently, or if he had decided not to leave, I'll never know what his intentions really were. And honestly, I don't want to. But ever since that day, I check every lock before I go to bed. Then I check them again, because sometimes it only takes one unlocked door for an ordinary afternoon to become the worst day of your life. This isn't a story about a stranger. It isn't about someone breaking into a house or someone hiding in the dark. This story is terrifying for a different reason. Because sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones you never expect to question. For nearly 4 years, the same woman babysat my son. She started watching him when he was only 1 year old. By the time he turned 5, she felt like part of the family. She wasn't just our babysitter anymore. She was our friend. When my daughter was born, there wasn't even a discussion about who would watch her. Of course she'd go to the same sitter. We trusted her completely. Over time, our families became incredibly close. We spent weekends together. Our husbands became close friends. The kids played together constantly. Never once did I think I had any reason to worry. Then one afternoon, everything changed. My husband arrived to pick up our children after work. The moment he saw our 8-month-old daughter, he knew something was wrong. She looked pale, unusually quiet. Her eyes seemed unfocused. Normally, she smiled the second she saw him. That day, she barely reacted at all. Instead of taking her home, he drove straight to my workplace. I worked only a few minutes away. The second I picked her up, I felt it too. She wasn't acting like herself. We called the after-hours doctor for advice. Since she'd received routine vaccinations 2 days earlier, we wondered if maybe she was having an unexpected reaction. But after hearing her symptoms, the doctor told us to go directly to the emergency room. While we were there, my phone rang. It was our babysitter. The second I answered, she started crying. She told me she'd had an accident. According to her, she'd been carrying my daughter and another young child down the stairs at the same time. She said she lost her grip, and my daughter fell. She apologized over and over, not just for the accident, but for hiding it. She admitted she hadn't told us because she was afraid we'd hate her, afraid we'd stop being friends. She claimed our daughter seemed okay afterward, until shortly before pickup. At first, I was furious. Not because accidents can't happen, they can, but because she hadn't told us immediately. Still, I tried to believe her. We decided not to let her watch our children anymore, but part of me wanted to think it had simply been a terrible mistake. At the hospital, doctors examined our daughter. She was already acting more like herself. There were no visible bruises, no obvious signs of severe injury. They decided against immediate advanced imaging, not wanting to expose such a young child unnecessarily if it wasn't needed, so we went home. For 2 days, we thought everything would be okay. Then suddenly, our daughter suffered a seizure. Moments later, she became unresponsive. An emergency scan revealed internal bleeding inside her head. Within hours, our entire world changed. We spent the weekend at the hospital praying she would recover. And then, another discovery was made. Medical specialists found additional injuries inside her eyes that suggested significant head trauma. The finding immediately triggered further investigation into how the injury occurred. Authorities became involved. Child protection investigators interviewed everyone. Doctors reviewed every detail. Through all of it, our babysitter never changed her story, not once. She insisted it had been an accident, exactly as she'd described from the beginning. But something else changed. Her behavior. The woman who had always adored our daughter suddenly became distant, uncomfortable, unable to look at her the same way. Every interaction felt different, almost like she was carrying a weight she couldn't put down. Maybe it was guilt over an accident. Maybe it was fear of being blamed. Or maybe it was something else entirely. I honestly don't know. And that's the hardest part, because there was never a confession, never an answer that explained everything. Only unanswered questions that still keep me awake at night. How could someone we trusted so completely hide something so important? Why wait until we were already at the hospital to tell us? Was fear enough to explain it? Or was there another reason? Those questions slowly destroyed every friendship connected to that family. Our children never returned. Our families drifted apart. The people we once spent holidays with became strangers. Sometimes the scariest stories don't end with an arrest or a monster hiding in the dark. Sometimes they end with uncertainty, because even years later, I still don't know exactly what happened inside that house that day. I only know this: the woman I trusted with my children was the last person to see my daughter healthy. And after that day, nothing was ever the same again.